our last tutorial, we began to describe activities, learning activities for level 1. And two of the activities that we talked about were participant observation, and then we also talked about the listen and act activity for comprehension. Now that listen and act activity is used completely through the whole of level 1 so that you can learn to, the goal being that you can learn to comprehend a foundational set of vocabulary, of words and phrases before you try to speak them. And so it would help you now to look quickly through the first 25 of the daily learning plans in level 1. And that would give you a feel, if you take time to do that right now, that it will give you a feel for the kind of vocabulary you'll learn initially. It's a broad, general set of vocabulary. Just remembering that you're not going to be able to say all of these things during these first activities, but you'll be learning to hear and to understand them. And so those corresponding pages that I'm describing are pages 29 to 64 that you should familiarize yourself with the kind of content in those first 25 learning plans. Now, after you've done that, after you've seen the kind of vocabulary base that you're trying to establish in comprehension, then the material here adds a new dynamic to the listen and act activity, because that activity becomes not just listen and act, but also begins to add in speaking for you. That you can read that introduction on page 65 and see that this new activity is building on the foundation of listen and act, and also building on the vocabulary that you are acquiring, that you've already learned up to this point. And so what I would encourage you to do in thinking this through is to trust the foundational, careful way in which the material has been laid out. Follow along systematically with what's been laid out, because there's a very definite building component here. And so you'll be hearing and understanding quite a number of new common vocabulary items, and now you'll be carefully adding in and appropriately adding in, repeating and saying those things for yourself. So you'll have already learned to comprehend a word or phrase, and you'll have heard it spoken repeatedly by a native speaker many times over. And then now in this version of the activity, you'll be learning to say it correctly for yourself. And so that's a natural learning process. What it means to understand and then to learn to say correctly, and not only saying correctly, but we're always emphasizing, and you'll see the emphasis on the fact that the hearing or the comprehension that you're involved in is in context of something, and that the repetition that of you repeating, listening and acting with speaking is in context of real language and real situations always. And so during the second half then of those level 1 daily learning plans, the plans that we would number from 26 to 50, that you'll begin to use that listen and act with speaking learning exercise, keeping the participant observation, because that's going to be an important part of you being continually introduced to common social and cultural events in the community, but then also applying the listen and act exercise as well. And again, not to overwhelm you, because we've very carefully laid out how you can do this. So right now we're introducing these things to you, but in the plans, the layout is clear. And so trust the guide and use it as a resource to help you to sort through how to apply these things. And even now, why don't you look quickly through those next learning plans, 26 to 50, and see basically what's being covered there. And so that you can get a feel for the way that listen and act with speaking exercise is built into those plans. Now, as we move on to the next set of pages, again, just briefly an introduction right now. But certainly would be good for you to scan your way through those pages from 66 to 113, because they give you an idea of what those learning plans represent, that second part of them. But then let's kind of summarize a little bit what it is that you'll be learning during level 1, because what we've tried to include in the BEC is a self-evaluation for the learner, so that you can have fairly tangible reference points in an evaluation that you can do for yourself that tie back to the material that you've completed. If you've truly carefully completed each of the daily learning plans in level 1, as you've moved your way through systematically, you should be able to fill out that self-evaluation at the end of the level, and you should be able to answer adequately well or extremely well in the section that's listed there to each of those questions, because you will have carefully and successfully worked your way through those. And so at this point, it would be good for you to just read through that self-evaluation and get an idea of the kind of language that someone at this level will be able to use. And those are the pages here from 114 to 118, that self-evaluation. So, by the end of level 1, you as a learner will have spent almost 200 hours, somewhere around 200 hours doing participant observation in a community setting. That's a lot of hours of observation. That would include your observing and participating in regular activities with people in real situations. And you'll also have spent as many as 300 hours doing listen and act activities to familiarize yourself with a key set of vocabulary items, as many as maybe 1,200 or up to 1,500 items that have become familiar to you in the foundational language that's used all the time by people around you. And you'll be becoming familiar with those local people, spending regular time with them. Imagining yourself in this situation, you can see that there's a lot of time, there's a lot of potential for you to have begun developing good, deep relationships with people in the community. And people are starting to get to know you through all of those intensive hours. You'll be getting an idea then of how things work, how you greet people. What are the interesting places you can visit? What are the things that are important to people because based on what they do? Who your neighbors are around you? What are the common activities in the community that you're participating in? Maybe mapping out your community as an example and seeing what the layout looks like. And certainly showing an interest in taking time to learn from those people around you and to put yourself in a place where you're beginning to learn their language in the cultural settings that are familiar to them. Okay, so we have given you an overview, a snapshot of level 1, and you've had opportunity to read through and at least scan and I trust read the majority of the material in the BEC that relates to that and helps you to understand it better. Now we're going to move into a description of level 2, a brief description. The level 2 we think of as in level 1 relating to the common and familiar, and then in level 2 relating through the daily routines of life. Now again, there are pages that you should read here. Pages 119 and 120 are helpful to you as you are introduced to the learning activities that will be used during level 2. And one, of course, will be participant observation. Another will be moving from listen and act to working with daily routines, and that's the name of the activity there. Participant observation will continue to be foundational for you as part of your learning process, that real-time, real situation interaction with people in a community. In a sense, when all of that learning content that you've been accumulating comes together and is solidified in real functional ability in situations where you can apply yourself to that, where you're put into the real stream of life. And so that's continuing to be an essential part of your learning. In the time schedule for level 2 learners, as you look at those pages, you're going to see that most of your time in this stage is still, there's a lot of time invested in participant observation, but a lot of time also that's going to be invested in working with daily routines. That activity is going to serve as a basis for you in level 2. And so just again, a brief introduction to the first part of level 2, and we'll continue on with those thoughts in our upcoming tutorial.